Good morning, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Let me give you a quick word before we get today's show started. We're going to have a lot of fun. A lot of you are aware, though, over the course of the last few months, we've just had a lot of challenges in terms of delivering the show the way that you've come to expect. I want to give you a little bit of an update on that, kind of a little bit of an explanation about kind of where things stand here right now. So the simplest way to explain this is we use a system to broadcast, some sort of like piece of equipment, and that piece of equipment has just sort of decided not to work on us. And we're obviously in the process of making some change around here. We're actually moving to a new studio pretty soon, so that's going to be kind of interesting. But in the aftermath of the sort of equipment that we've used to deliver the show not working, we've been kind of scrambling to sort of figure out, well, okay, what do you do in response to all of that? So I really appreciate the people behind the scenes who've kind of helped us try to return this show to normalcy. We feel like today is going to be another step in that direction. It may not look exactly the way you've come to expect it, and it hopefully starts to sound a little bit more like that, though, bringing some of that back in here, bringing just some of the overall vibe here. Very, very thankful to be able to do that. And for those of you who've been patient with us throughout this process, we certainly appreciate that there as well. The good news is we feel like we've got a really fun show in place here. Jon Stinchcomb joins us. That's always a really good thing. And also, I feel like today sort of feels like the start of something new. Yes, there's one more game of the 2023 season tonight, but in so many ways, it feels like Georgia's kind of already turned the page to a new year. And that new year, I believe, offers a lot of really good things for Georgia. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to figure out kind of where all things stand. And by the way, there's a very, very interesting transfer portal rumor as it relates to Georgia here. We're going to cover some of that here over the course of the next few minutes as well. So we're so happy to have you a part of what we're doing here today. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is one more game in the college football season left over tonight. I'm not going to lie to you. I couldn't care less about this game. I don't care if Michigan wins. I don't care if Washington wins. Now, in some respect, it's sort of easy to root against Michigan because they're obviously cheaters. And, clearly justice would be served by having Michigan not win this game tonight. So in one respect, I guess it's sort of easy to root for Washington. But I've told many of you before, I've also got a little bit of beef against Washington, too. Perhaps not as significant as, the obvious ill-gotten gain that the Wolverines have benefited from all year long. My beef with Washington more along the lines of sort of a stolen valor type thing, where at times the Huskies have also enjoyed calling themselves the Dogs, D-A-W-G-S. I find that incredibly offensive. It's also, from a dialect standpoint, just wrong. People from the Pacific Northwest don't speak that way. So I have some beef against Washington, probably more beef against Michigan, most of us do. The game is tonight. I don't really care a ton about it, but it is there. Now, that said, even though I'm not all that juiced up about tonight's national championship game, certainly nowhere near to the degree I would have been in obviously each of the last 2 years, I do find myself to be in an incredibly good mood here this morning. And maybe as a Georgia fan, you sense the same sort of thing. Sometimes there's just sort of a feel in the atmosphere, and you kind of notice it, you kind of feel it. I feel like that's where I kind of am right now. It just sort of seems like we've kind of gotten through something, right? It sort of seems like we've turned the corner on something. The transfer portal is over, and there is much rejoicing in the land about that. For UGA, that window has come to a close. You lost some guys, you held on to some guys, the fight was ongoing, and now it's sort of over. And we're not technically to the NFL draft declaration deadline. That's the 15th, is that right? But for the most part, it seems like that's all going pretty well here for UGA. Georgia getting pretty good news over the last 24, 48, 72 hours, however long it's been. Xavier Truss, Tate Ratledge coming back along the offensive line, Nazir Stackhouse coming back along the defensive line. That all really feels like, kind of a very good piece of news. There are other announcements we believe that are still, upcoming, and we sort of feel like those announcements are going to be pretty good for UGA. There is growing optimism that Warren Brinson may come back for the 2024 season. That would be really very nice. Some thoughts that guys like Rod Thomas and Dominic Lovett, much expected to come back. They're going to confirm that expectation. They're going to be back here, there as well. And you sort of see a picture of what Georgia's going to look like for 2024. And I got to tell you, based on the incoming recruits. We'll talk a little bit about the All-American Bowl a little bit later on. But based on all of this, it just sort of seems like Georgia is in a really good spot for 2024. A very strong roster, very much in place to contend for the 2024 season. And it sort of feels like coming in on this Monday for the first time in a while. Now, we do have kind of a wild transfer portal rumor we'll get to here in a couple of minutes. But for the first time in a while, it sort of feels like we're sort of sitting here doing this show kind of more in peacetime as opposed to the very chaotic wartime it sort of feels like we've been in over the course of the last couple of weeks. And I sort of feel like that's a very, very nice place to be. Do you get the same sense of that the way that I do? I believe that you probably do. And it also allows us to sort of turn the page here a little bit about the embrace that I believe that Georgia fans should have for 2024. Not just because of the fact that I believe that Georgia's well positioned for the 2024 season, but I do believe that the 2024 season is also going to bring a lot of excitement for college football fans in general and Georgia fans in particular. And there are always two ways in which we talk about stuff like this. They're kind of like and I don't know if you noticed this or if you've ever quite articulated it this way, but I believe it's true. There's sort of twin pillar conversations that take place here. We talk about what's good for college football overall, because right now that's a very relevant topic. And we talk about parallel to that, what's also good for UGA. And I believe, not everybody agrees with this, I totally understand, but I believe that as we move tonight, say goodbye to the 14 playoff era and move forward starting tomorrow into the new era of the 12-team playoff, I believe for the most part, this is very good for college football, and in particular, very good for UGA. Let me explain why just briefly here. In the case of just sort of college football overall, I think one of the most distasteful parts about this sport is the power a bunch of what I would call unelected bureaucrats sort of have. That group of people on the college football playoff selection committee, I don't trust their judgment. I'm not quite so sure I trust anything about them necessarily. And in a 14 playoff world, they have a lot of power. And I don't particularly like the power they've been given. And I love the idea that as you expand the playoff and put more teams in, you are kind of reducing the power the committee has, because all of a sudden now there are just going to be left, or I should say they're going to be less, I mean to say less kind of the high voltage, volatile debates the way that there were this year about who should be the top four. There will still be some when it comes to the top 12, and there'll still be obviously a lot when it comes to, well, who's hosting a playoff game, who's going on the road. The nature of the debate's changing, but by expanding the playoff, you are reducing some of the power the committee has. I believe overall that's a very, very good thing. But beyond that, when it comes to Georgia in particular, I also think the new era of the sport, which sort of officially begins tomorrow, I also think in a roundabout way that is a very good thing for Georgia there as well. Because while on the one hand, life is about to get much tougher for Georgia. Georgia's playing a much tougher schedule next year, arguably the toughest schedule this program has ever played. It will play in the regular season of 2024. And the path to winning a national championship is getting more difficult, if for no other reason, because that path now gets longer. You've got to play in a deeper conference, which adds Oklahoma and Texas kind of officially, so to speak, starting tomorrow. Expanded playoff means additional games win a national championship. The idea of winning a national championship getting more difficult is sort of proven out by the fact that just the path is just getting longer. There are just more games to win, more tough opponents. But it's also sort of true that while it's tougher for Georgia, it's kind of also tougher for everybody there as well. Go look at Michigan's schedule for 2024, for instance. You know, the new additions to the from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten are on that schedule, and it certainly doesn't look very easy. Alabama's playing a pretty tough schedule, I would say, for next year. For the most part, the teams that we think of as that kind of top level of contender, as long as you're in the SEC or the Big Ten, almost everybody is about to get a little bit of a tougher regular season schedule moving forward. And the longer expanded playoff is going to impact everybody the same way. In other words, here's how I'd say this. One of the things that I think ought to make you excited as a Georgia fan is the knowledge and the belief that things getting tougher for you is better because the best teams are best proven in tougher circumstances. I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind here, that if you are the most talented team, if you're the best coach, if you have the best overall program, then you want the challenge of winning a national championship to be as difficult as possible, because that just makes it more likely that you emerge on the other side of that. You're able to survive that stress test because you were just overall of a much greater strength than the teams you're competing with. And I'll tell you what kind of brought this to mind for me. I thought that Pat Forty from Sports Illustrated had a very interesting column up this week talking about how this year's national championship game feels just so different than previous national title games because of, relatively speaking here, the relatively low level of talent measurably on the Michigan roster and the Washington roster compared to teams that have been winning national championships in previous years, including Georgia the last 2 years. In fact, let me read you a few sentences here coming from Pat Forty from Sports Illustrated. He writes that the 24/7 Sports team talent composite for 2023 ranks Michigan roster at number 14 overall based on high school football recruiting rankings, and Washington comes in at number 26. He says, since that team talent metric debuted in 2015, every national champion is ranked in the top 10, and all but one national champion, that's Clemson in 2016, are ranked in the top 6. Forty goes on to write that the schools have, he says, the schools that have annually dominated recruiting rankings in recent years, Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State, rank first, second, third in the 24/7 Sports composite formula for this 2023 season. He says they've also combined to win 6 of the last 9 playoff national championship titles, and they've earned a combined 15 playoff bids. He says, but they'll all be spectators on Monday night. Now, the premise of Forty's column is the discussion of, well, does this sort of begin a new trend where all of a sudden there's a little bit more balance in the sport, and teams like Washington kind of outside the top 25 in overall talent, teams like Michigan outside the top 10, all of a sudden they are more capable of competing for the title. And what I'm going to tell you is I believe this is a little bit of a one-off. This is capable in the 14 playoff because there is a lot of luck involved in such a small sample of who makes the college football playoff. But when you expand to add a quarterfinal round, and for some teams a round prior to that, when you expand the playoffs out, the likes of a Washington outside the top 25 in overall talent, eventually that's going to get exposed. I would say even for a Michigan outside the top 10, in most cases, in the new expanded playoff and in the new toughened up regular seasons, they're going to kind of dominate the sport, the SEC and the Big Ten level. That's also the kind of thing that over time is just more likely to get exposed. And so for Georgia, who for next year is still, for the most part, going to be among the most talented rosters in college football, the idea of a new 12-team playoff, I think, is a very good thing for Georgia in particular. I think that Georgia is set up well for the new stress test that's on the way, and the whole idea of, hey, this Washington team sort of came out of nowhere, and this Michigan team, less measurably talented than some of its SEC counterparts, yet still playing for the title while the SEC teams are at home. I think for the most part, this is going to end up feeling like a one-off, and in the future, the very best, most talented teams are going to be set up for the greatest level of dominance, and obviously for a long time to come, we sort of expect that to be UGA. In fact, one more point to kind of sort of wrap all of this up. Starting tomorrow, we get into a time of year that I find to be really enjoyable. This is the time of year in which those way too early top 25s start coming out. We'll have a flood of those beginning tomorrow. We've already gotten one of those here right now. Brett McMurphy, longtime veteran college football reporter, now working for the Action Network, which is a gambling website. But McMurphy, I believe, takes the gold medal to be the first reporter to get a way too early top 25 out for the upcoming season. I'll show you this on the screen here. You're probably maybe surprised, maybe not surprised to find out that Georgia ranks number 1 on McMurphy's way too early top 25 for the 2024 season. Now, listen, I'm not so sure you should be popping champagne bottles over this or anything like that, but it is an indicator of the point that I've been making here over the course of the last few minutes to begin this show, that after tonight, we say goodbye to the old 14 playoff era. Pretty good for UGA. They won 2 national championships, but we say hello to a brand new era for the sport. It's going to take us a few months to sort of figure this out. What exactly are the new rules for the playoff? How do you get in? How's this system going to work? It's going to take some feeling around to sort of decide what this is all about. But the big picture story here is I do believe this new format, while probably better for college football overall, is especially good for programs like UGA. If you're Georgia, you want it to be hard. You want the schedules to be tough in the regular season. You want the playoff to be as long and arduous as possible because the weaker teams, the less talented teams, will be more likely to fall by the wayside throughout that process. And the best of the best are more likely to emerge the tougher the overall test is. That, I believe, is a very good thing for UGA. Brett McMurphy, the first to say he believes that Georgia will be back on top in 2024, and who are we to say that he's wrong? My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We are happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us. Live on video, starting at 10 a.m. across all platforms, even earlier than that on our First and 15, DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. We take your comments and talk about Georgia football there with you. We're on radio, Athens Sports Radio 963F, podcasts, wherever you find them. Just really, really happy to have you as a part of our program here today. And incredibly thankful to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for making this show possible. So tonight, we're in a place that we don't necessarily want to be. We're forced to sit at home and watch the national championship on a cold January Monday night. But guess what? If you got to sit at home and watch a game like this, next best thing is to feel toasty and warm in your home, knowing that all that cold weather and windy conditions and nastiness of the winter, that's all kept outside the home where it's supposed to be. And inside, you feel nice and toasty and warm. And those heating bills that are so expensive this day and age, all of that is staying right inside the house where it's supposed to be, and you're heating your house in the most efficient way possible because of Pella Window and Door. That is what makes the show possible for you here today. And it's time for you to have one of those conversations with one of those Pella experts if you have not done that before, and kind of find out why that their slogan is more than just a slogan. Pella Window and Door of Georgia truly is viewed to be the best. Homeowners who are the most committed to taking the best possible care of their home understand that the Pella doors, just better doors. The Pella windows, just better windows. In fact, if you're out there kind of a new construction type thing and you see this stuff being built right there, always a sign of quality craftsmanship, I should say, when you see those Pella windows and doors being installed there. That's a good sign of good things. And if you want to show off the same kind of sort of value for your own home, installing Pella windows and doors is a great thing to do. Now, you can hear me talk to you about this, but it's even better to hear this from one of those Pella experts. In fact, I think it's probably time for you to have that free, no-pressure consultation. They don't want to try to sell you something. They want to inform you on why it's time for you to consider those Pella windows and doors. They'll come by and see you in your own home and have that conversation with you there. Once again, not a pressure discussion, just an informative conversation. You can go see them at their Experience Center there in Duluth, which I think is worth a stop by to see there anyway, because it's just a cool building. It's a great way to sort of see the best of the entire product line that Pella has to offer. You can do that there in Duluth. Or you can reach out to them and give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. You can also visit them at pellaofga.com/DawgNation. That's pellaofga.com/DawgNation. And when you have that conversation, make sure you tell them that BA said they take good care of you. I know they will. But also tell them that BA said there's a great deal and some great savings out there right now, because between now and January 31st, you can get 10% off Pella projects and 0% APR for 36 months. Make sure you check that out. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. All right, we're going to talk to Jon Stinchcomb here coming up in just a couple of minutes. Prior to that, I want to go around the doghouse. And as a way of setting up what we're about to discuss, a little bit of an interesting transfer portal rumor out there for UGA. Let's go back in time here for a moment, back to December. It was National Signing Day. Georgia brought in Ryan Puglisi to the 2024 class at the quarterback position, but obviously had initially intended to have two quarterbacks as a part of that class. It would have been Puglisi and Dylan Raiola. Now, Georgia also got the news that Carson Beck was coming back. So the landscape for Georgia was, okay, Beck is returning, Raiola's not coming here, Puglisi is, and Gunnar Stockton expected to stay, with the thought that eventually Gunnar Stockton himself would become a very good quarterback here at UGA, but that is 3 scholarship quarterbacks. So Kirby Smart was asked, around National Signing Day about how the decision of Beck to return impacts quarterback recruiting overall, and Kirby was willing to kind of get kind of specific into this. This is a little bit of a longer exchange with one of the reporters. Kirby eventually kind of gets pretty specific about what Georgia expects from a numeric standpoint from the number of quarterbacks on its roster, and kind of perhaps what Georgia was willing to kind of go out and do as a way of rectifying what Georgia thought was a need. I'm going to play this clip for you, and then we're going to talk about Kirby being a man of his word after that. Here is Kirby Smart going back to December National Signing Day.
I don't think Carson's decision had any impact on our quarterback recruiting situation. I think a lot of independent variables there that we felt pretty good that Carson's coming back the entire time. He's communicated with us. He did his research and certainly had options, but he communicated that he wanted to grow and continue to get better. And And so he made that choice. What was the second part of that, Chip?
Was whether you would still need to sign another quarterback between now and the next period.
Yeah, that's something we have to think long and hard about. Our hard number is 4. We want to be at 4, and we're not at 4. So again, we'll look at our options and see what we can do there. We would like to be at 4, though. That's our goal.
So there you go. That's Kirby Smart back in December saying that Georgia wanted to have 4 scholarship quarterbacks. Their goal for their position is to do that. And so that led us to believe, Georgia could go out and pursue another quarterback here in 2024 out of the transfer portal, perhaps. And at one point in time, there was sort of the Malik Murphy chatter. Murphy seems in line to be a starter somewhere. So that never really materialized at UGA. He's going to Duke instead, probably has that job essentially handed to him there. That's a little bit more in line with what he perhaps might want. So you're left to wonder, what kind of quarterback might Georgia go after? And specifically, who is that quarterback that Georgia might target? We may have a little bit of information related to that today. I want to show you this on the screen for a moment. This coming from one of the On3 reporters. His name is Scott Schrader, saying he had some late information on Jaden Maeva, I should say. Sometimes the pronunciation's going to get me. Jaden Maeva, the UNLV quarterback, who apparently, according to Schrader, has visited now both USC and Georgia. So to sort of flip this around here and say this a little bit more of a sensible way, Georgia has hosted UNLV quarterback Jaden Maeva on a visit here, apparently in recent days. Now, who is Maeva? Well, he was the quarterback of the Rebels here this year. Pretty good numbers overall. Important to note, though, that UNLV for a while here this year was probably about the best Group of 5 team in America. Barry Odom, first-year head coach. Obviously, Odom, the former Missouri head coach, went to UNLV, and the Running Rebels were having great success for quite some time. They kind of fell apart a little bit by the end of the year for whatever reason, but UNLV had a very good year this year. Maeva, for the most part, had a really good year too. Pretty good dual threat quarterback overall, and at least some running threat. I don't want to say dual threat necessarily, but some running threat, but also kind of pretty good numbers. Now, this is not the same thing of getting future first-round pick. I mean, Maeva's a guy that was a pretty effective starter for a pretty good Group of 5 team. Let's make sure that we are, I think, accurate what this description is. This is a guy that had some success for a team that was pretty good. And in a place like Georgia, if he were to come here, he would provide some quarterback depth. Better than Carson Beck? Of course not. Better than Gunnar Stockton? I would say probably not. More game ready than Ryan Puglisi in 2024? Probably so. A fulfillment of Kirby Smart's wish to have 4 scholarship quarterbacks in place the upcoming season? I'd say that's probably about right. That's probably about what that is. So what we said was, once Georgia kind of got to the spot here where it knew it was going to have Dylan Raiola, they needed some sort of insurance policy against quarterback injury, or just even have effective practices. You want as many reps as possible. You want those scholarship quarterbacks to be able to provide that. This sort of feels like perhaps what this Maeva story might be. Now, does he go to Georgia? Does he go to a place like USC? How real does this materialize after that? Because just because you take a visit doesn't necessarily mean that's where you're going to end up. But it is interesting to note here, according to some pretty substantial reporting from a respected website, Georgia has hosted a transfer quarterback, a guy that had some success at the Group of 5 level here for UNLV. So we will continue to follow this, and we'll give you any new information once it becomes available. So that's the story there on that. Now, to kind of broaden things back out a little bit, we opened our show today by saying sort of feels like Georgia sort of turned the page here a little bit. Looking ahead now to 2024 for the most part, after having weathered the storm of the transfer portal, the NFL draft declarations mostly seem to be going Georgia's way right now. And so all of that seems, for the most part, pretty good, pretty positive. So what does that mean is next for UGA, and how ready are all of us to sort of make sense of this brand new format, this brand new era for the sport that essentially begins tomorrow? We'll cover all of that ground right now as we get ready to welcome in Jon Stinchcomb to DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, here today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, as promised, we'll welcome on Jon Stinchcomb to the program here today. John, we're glad to have you with us, and sort of started this a moment ago by saying kind of feels like Georgia has kind of gone past a little bit of a corner pole here, that it seems like for the last however many weeks we've come in and done the show on kind of a wartime footing where it's like, is so-and-so staying or so-and-so leaving, or, what's next, crazy news coming up over and over and over again. It sort of seems like today was the first true off-season day where we came in to do the show. And listen, I love news. It's fun to have all that kind of stuff to talk about. But there's also an element where it feels good to be able to do a show on a little bit more of a relaxed footing than we've done it here in the past. Do you get the same sense that I do, that there's a feeling in the atmosphere that sort of changed here a little bit, and Georgia now is a little bit more certain and aware of what its 2024 roster is going to look like?
Without question. I think there were such shifting sands in December that you didn't know who was going to play in the bowl, and you didn't know who was going to be on the roster in 2024. You didn't know who was going to be in the transfer portal, who we were going to pick up, who's going to the NFL draft. A lot of those questions have been answered, and that's exciting for Dog fans because we like certainty. We like to know that our best players are going to be back, and I think we've got a much better sense of who's going to be available this coming year. Now, there's still going to be turnover, but that's for now. There is a sense of ease that we know who's going to be at least available through spring practice and G-Day.
And I got to tell you, I sort of feel like, John, that the roster that I'm seeing come together here, I'll tell you, I like it. I mean, getting the news of like Xavier Truss and Tate Ratledge coming back, that's an incredible level of offensive line depth compared to what most teams in America are going to have. Nazir Stackhouse coming back along the defensive line. That's a huge win, I believe, for Georgia, that obviously the early stage of the offseason, hope always springs eternal. But in the case of Georgia here, Carson Beck's the biggest possible news. But I think overall, the story of who's leaving and who's going, it seems like to me Georgia has won a lot more battles of these than they've lost.
Yeah, it's a net win for Georgia. You look at across the country and the number of players that have left programs, and Georgia had their fair share. But let's be honest, if we're looking at it, the net, it's a net positive for Georgia. There was a number of players that were promising that entered their name into the transfer portal, and I think they were prioritized by Georgia. You look at Daniel Harris and Julian Humphrey and younger players like that who you say, man, there is still a great opportunity for them to wear the red and black and help this team. And Georgia was able to retain them. Not to say that, there wasn't opportunities for guys that left Georgia if they were to stay, but it was mostly a group of individuals that, probably don't have the highest ceilings, at least remaining, wearing the red and black. And when you get guys like Tate Ratledge coming back and obviously Carson Beck, that's a huge boost to this overall roster. Both sides of the ball, interior offensive line as well as that defensive front. And now you've added some other pieces, primarily through just National Signing Day. And there is a lot of expectation for what could be for this Georgia team going forward.
I thought it was a big deal the other day, to keep this conversation going, I thought it was a big deal the other day that Georgia was able to convince Julian Humphrey not to leave. And there's an element of like, there's always the world as you wish it is, and there's the world that's actual reality. And there's something very important for anybody who wants to be a success in any field, the willingness and the capability to confront reality on its own terms here. And the reality is that, guys do have freedom of movement. Guys, are going to hear these sort of last minute pitches from teams that aren't capable of developing their own players. They're going to try to swoop in and take shortcuts here, and no telling what Julian Humphrey heard and all that kind of stuff. And I know he seemingly sort of flip-flopped 2 or 3 times, on the basis of his final decision. Even some of his Georgia teammates were sort of laughing about just how, kind of sort of ostentatious this story got before it's all said and done. But when it's all said and done, you want players like Julian Humphrey on your roster. This is a cornerback who could be an NFL, talent here. And if you lost him, you just have to go out and try to replace him with somebody else of a similar talent level. No easy feat necessarily. So another example of all of this, not only is Georgia getting some sort of could have left NFL-type guys to stay with the program, but a guy like Humphrey, who seemed like the very last minute might be strongly considering leaving UGA, all of a sudden now he's not. It's another example of, I feel like if you're a Georgia fan, you've had a few days worth of pretty good news here as of late.
Yeah, there's more wins than losses. I think there's predominantly been wins for Georgia as we prepare for tonight's game, and there's still a little sting to it. But recognizing that we have to turn the page, and we're now looking to the 2024 season. The number of players that Georgia was able to retain, whether battling the NFL draft or other programs, and that's the world we live in today, where you enter that transfer portal, and it has been more positive than negative for Georgia. But the number of players that Georgia was able to keep from this previous season heading into this next year, I think is a very positive sign that Georgia is positioned well for the future. There's a number of teams that are competitive for a season or can flash in the pan, or they're trying to buy their way into relevance for a single season. That's not the way Georgia has shaped their roster.
So moving on, tomorrow sort of begins what I think of first day of the kind of the 12-team playoff era. I don't know how much you and I have talked about this, but I believe this is probably good for the sport, generally speaking. I think some of the debates that we've had this year, for instance, not very good. I think the overall idea of including more teams in the playoff, taking power away from the committee, probably a good step forward for the sport. But beyond that, more important for our audience, I believe a 12-team expanded playoff and just a tougher road towards a national championship, generally speaking, I believe that benefits a program like Georgia. If you're the best, you want the test, I believe, to be as tough as possible because you're just more likely to see yourself emerge. The tougher the test is, the better the eventual winner is. Do you agree that the 12-team playoff era is particularly good for a program like UGA?
I think so. I think it eliminates some of the subjectivity that you see year to year. Obviously, this was a year where it was very subjective, as you identify 4 out of 6 teams that had resumes that could include their teams and their rights to the college football playoffs. But there's more shoes to drop. I mean, you look across the board, and it's got to dovetail into what we do during the season. It obviously allows teams that are ranked higher to lose a game, much like what we see in the NFL. I mean, you see, as we play more games, it is hard to play week in and week out high-level football. And for Georgia to have sustained the record that they have over these past 4 years is astonishing. To not have an off week, or when you do have an off week, still find a way to win is really impressive and hard to do. So I think all in all, it is an improvement. We're heading in the right direction. It eliminates, the power of a room full of people subjectively identifying the teams that they feel are the best suited to win a championship, and allows more teams to prove it on the field. So
I have said that I believe there is a strong chance we won't have any more undefeated college football playoff national champions anymore. Obviously, tonight there's going to be one, but this might end up being sort of the last undefeated national champion, at least for quite some time. There may obviously, it's a slightly shorter season in the NFL, so it's more likely to happen in college football than it is in the NFL, but the same way in the sort of Super Bowl era, we've got the 72 offense, and the Patriots almost did it. I think it was 2007. Other than that, NFL Super Bowl champions, they just take losses, and some of them take quite a bit of losses. I believe that college football, John, moving forward, is going to start looking a whole lot more like that, especially in the SEC and, frankly, in the Big Ten there as well, because that league's getting tougher too. And if you're an undefeated ACC team that sneaks in, well, you're likely to have happen to you what happened to Florida State, which is eventually you're going to get exposed, right? You may beat up on your own competition, your own league, but you get into an expanded playoff where you have to win the quarterfinals and the semis, and then again in the national championship game. Eventually, that team is just likely to get exposed. I just don't believe we're going to see an undefeated national champion moving forward.
I think we will at some point, but it certainly won't be the regularity that we've seen it in the past. And I think that's a good thing for college football fans. Hopefully, as we continue to evolve across this ever-shifting sands of college football, one of the things that I'm hoping for is you see 2 power conferences emerge between the SEC and Big Ten is more competitive football. The fact that, we've had undefeated champions, one, that's really cool to say, but you also have to look at who did they play. If we can make the value of the regular season games of higher quality, you're playing better opponents where you don't have these cupcakes week in and week out. Yes, it will mean we'll have fewer undefeated champions at the end of the season, but it also means we've got some really good games throughout that regular season that matter more.
Yeah.
And I think that's exciting for fans.
Let me tell you how specifically this sort of shows up for me. Now, I am in most years about as ambitious about Georgia's chances as anybody possibly could be. I think for 2024, I feel the same way. But as a staunch Georgia partisan, if you told me right now I could have 11-1 for Georgia in this upcoming season, in the regular season, I'd take it and run with it. John, I might even take 10-2. If you told me right now, hey, BA, on January the whatever, before the season even begins, months before the season begins, you can secure a 10-2 regular season record for Georgia, would you take that? I believe I might, with the full belief that 10-2 in the regular season might be plenty enough to get Georgia right where it wants to be to win the national championship in the expanded playoff. Maybe history's going to say that I'm a little bit too I guess, out in front of what the actual new format's going to look like. But Georgia's got road games next year against Texas, Bama, and Ole Miss. I believe even the most, deep red, Georgia fan, has got to probably view 2 of those 3 games turning into wins as a success. The idea that you're going to clean sweep those 3 road games, I just don't know that you will. Now, you may say, well, the one you really need to win of that 3 is whatever, and that's a conversation worth having. But 2 of those 3, to me, would feel like a huge success. And then, almost running the table, with the rest of that schedule seems about right there, too. I'm as ambitious as anybody about what Georgia can do. But when I look at this 2024 schedule, I don't see a 0 in the loss column, I don't believe.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be. I think in years past, we recognize to have a legit chance at winning a national championship, even before the college football playoffs were a 4-team format, you had to be undefeated, or you have to be pretty selective of where that loss comes. Now, that's not the case. I think Georgia very realistically can lose 1 game, realistically 2 games, and still their ultimate goal, if our ultimate goal is to win national championships, you can do that, still be a part of the college football playoffs, and finish strong. It has to play out the right way. You have to have the right dynamics within your team and be healthy at the right time and playing good football, and all those things still remain true. But it does allow you to cover up some of those losses that are incurred during the season, much like the NFL. The reason why in an NFC South, you play your 3 common opponents twice. Very rarely do you see a clean sweep from either side, and that's even with teams having experienced some down years. So I think that just proves the difficulty when you play high-level football against quality opponents, which Georgia has on their schedule this coming year. 3 away games that are going to be really tough challenges. I think it's very realistic for Georgia fans to say, if our goal is to win national championships, then we can lose 1 or 2 of those games and still have a very plausible path towards a national championship at the end of the season.
Well, speaking of the national championship, the game is tonight, Washington and Michigan. I told our audience to kick off the show I have less than 0 interest in this game. I just don't care. I reckon I'll watch. If it's not very, very close, though, I may not see the end of this. But to be, objective for a moment here, do you have a thought on how you think this game might play out tonight?
I just want Michigan to lose. That's basically where I stand. I don't like the way that program has been handled, especially this season, and the poor pitiful me line that they're pushing out there of it's us against the world. The reason why it's us against the world for Michigan is because you cheated and got caught red-handed, and then your quarterback this week comes out and basically admits that very thing. So it could be a vacated national championship even if they do win. I just don't have a respect for the program at this time. Now, if that was withstanding, I think they tried to model themselves similar to the way Georgia was built, with some physicality and building the locker room inside out. With that said, aside from wanting Michigan to lose, it's not like I'm rooting for Washington in this game. Inconsequential at that point.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that Michigan benefited from the Connor Stallion stuff. And I think that Michigan thinks that it benefited from it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have worked so hard and devoted so many resources to making sure that happen. This is something that Michigan believed worked. I do believe it benefited them. And I don't think the game against Alabama, which presumably, didn't happen with Connor Stalions' help, although I guess Stalions was at the game, we've seen photographic evidence of. I don't think beating Alabama alone in sort of a close-fought game changes the overall perception for me of how it got there, as sort of corny and maybe naive as it sounds. I think that Michigan was aided by the efforts that it took to get this extra information on its opponents, and I'm not quite ready to give that up just simply because they beat Alabama the other night.
Yeah, they're a good team. They are a good team with or without the help that they received. With that said, the help they received was outside the boundaries by miles of wherever that line is, where it happens to be gray. They aren't close to it, and almost admittedly so. And when you've got a really good team playing other good teams, and you have that kind of advantage, it matters. And I think it affects the integrity of the overall game that we all play towards. And for those that try to argue, well, doesn't everybody try to get that's not a valid argument in this case. I mean, what Michigan did in a systemic level was by far outside the bounds that anyone could see as, well, that's just gamesmanship. That is not. That lacks any, falls well below the threshold for any team as to trying to gain a fair competitive advantage.
John, I love the conversation. I'm excited about this new year. I feel like we're going to have so many fun things to talk about. It's great to have Georgia in the mix for all of this, but I think it's just sort of great to have kind of a new era coming in for the sport. Admittedly, I haven't been that excited about SEC expansion, but now it's here. I'm going to make the best of that. I am a lot more excited about playoff expansion overall. I think that's a good thing for the sport here. So a lot of fun conversation. We got a lot of work to do to sort of figure out exactly how all this is going to look and feel. I trust you to help us get that done, and we just hope that your 2024 is off to a great start. We appreciate you being a part of our program.
Hey, likewise, BA. Always great to be a dog.
Yes, sir. Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, really good stuff from Jon Stinchcomb. Just really appreciate his thoughts on a lot of this kind of stuff. And, I'm glad to hear John kind of be where I am on this, which is, without getting too serious, it's sort of been coded as a low-class belief to care about cheating. Like, if you watch the way in which some people kind of talk about this in social media, that if you're sophisticated, you're not worried about cheating, you assume that everybody's doing it, and so therefore you're sort of more interested in outcome and results. But there is something to be said for having rules, enforcing those rules, and assuming that if Michigan works as hard as it did to, create this perceived advantage, that it thought it was getting a true advantage, and the overall statistical performance, kind of what we think of as the Connor Stalions era, would suggest that Michigan probably was getting a lot of help from them. They haven't been nearly as good since then. That's sort of the story there on all of that. So all that's pretty interesting stuff. I'll have more on the championship game here coming up in a moment. Prior to that, though, let's go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And this weekend, my wife and I took some time to do some of those finishing touches on some travel plans. Many of you know we're going to be on board Icon of the Seas coming up here in really just a few weeks, which I'm very, very excited about. And it's always fun. Well, one of the things that we like to do is, not everybody does this, but we enjoy doing this, is kind of getting that hotel room right near the port on the night before the cruise. So we kind of booked that. We, try to find that hotel that's kind of close by there, and it's always fun if you can sort of see the port from the hotel. That's always sort of fun and exciting. I love just the giant kind of expansive nature of these Royal Caribbean cruise ships, the way in which they look so big when they're sailing in or sailing out. It's just a fun, exciting thing to be able to see. I am sort of like a grown-up kid, and so anything kind of related to that just gets me really, really excited, as it would for a kid. So can't wait to tell you about Icon of the Seas, getting a chance to be on that coming up in a couple of weeks. By the way, speaking of kids, I think the thing that's going to be so exciting about Icon is the way it really is going to kind of usher in a new era of family-oriented vacations on Royal Caribbean cruise ships. I believe that Royal Caribbean probably does the best job of entertaining the entire family because of all the different things they offer on board the ship, and that's one of the things I can't wait to come back and tell all of you about. Many of you know these ships have their own special neighborhoods, and one of the things that icon of the season is debuting as a sort of a special family-oriented neighborhood where it's like, family pools and family get-together, like just stuff for the family here. Obviously, the entertainment kind of geared towards that there as well. So it's going to be a great experience for families. Can't wait to tell you about it. Jessica Slater, terrific travel agent. She'll tell you more about this. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Or you can email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Now, here's the other thing, too. We're getting very close to Dog Nation cruise time, y'all. This is real. This is showtime, go time. Time to make your official plans to be on board with us. The availability is going to run out here, so get on board, be a part of that. RoyalDogs.com. That's the website to go to. You can find out more about all of that. All right, we got a lot of cruise around the SEC news to get to, and then there's a couple of Georgia notes I want to hit before our show is done today. So let's kind of roll through some of this here right now. I thought it was very funny how upset Dan Mullen made a lot of people here this week. And it kind of upset me too, I guess, but I sort of mostly thought it was funny. So Dan Mullen, who has kind of fully embraced his role in the media here right now, and one of the things that media types like to do is put out their own rankings, things like that. Mullen has sort of gotten in trouble before with some of his picks here this year. He's been kind of kicked around, or Kirby Smart's kind of beaten up on him and kind of kicked him around a little bit. And perhaps Mullen sort of feels like he got his full and final revenge over Kirby here, because a couple of days ago, Dan Mullen put out his final top 10. Ohio State at 10, Missouri at 9, Ole Miss at 8, Oregon at 7. He had Georgia at number 6, fresh off a 63-3 win against Florida State. The Seminoles, by comparison, he still had it third. They lost a bowl game by 60, stayed at number 3 in his rankings. Georgia won the game by literally 60 points and did not move up from number 6. Georgia fans were obviously going all after him, which I think they should. It's, I think, probably all in good fun. Mullen seems to probably get that kind of stuff too. But the thing I love more than anything is Kirby essentially took his lunch money as a coach on the field, put him in the unemployment line, and has since made fun of him countless times as being an unemployed coach. And Dan Mullen's only revenge is to tweet about it. Like, don't you just love that? I mean, don't you just love that more than anything else? That Mullen's only way of getting back at Kirby for the merciless, beatings that Kirby's given his way, both verbally and on the football field, is to fire off a snarky tweet where he keeps Georgia at number 6 in his poll. I think that's pretty fun. I think that's pretty entertaining. Georgia fans weren't too happy, and I think all is fair when it comes to these kind of debates this time of year. Speaking of debates, there is already a conversation starting to form around the 2024 Heisman Trophy. Interesting to see the number of SEC quarterbacks kind of already in the mix there on all of this. That when you look at some of the early odds out there, FanDuel's got some out here right now. You see Quinn Ewers, who's expected to come back, Jalen Milroe, who is coming back, and Carson Beck. They're all right now at kind of 7.5 to 1 to win next year's Heisman Trophy. So you got 3 SEC quarterbacks kind of very much in the mix for next year's Heisman Trophy. Giving you an idea, this is going to be a pretty deep year coming up for quarterbacks in the league. You've got some other guys that are in there. Nico Iamaleava from Tennessee, he's at 15 to 1. Oklahoma's Jackson Arnold, keep in mind that's an SEC quarterback now. He's at 18 to 1. I think that Arnold can be a really good player. I think Arnold's a really good quarterback. Texas A&M's Connor Wegman at 18 to 1. I don't really know what to think about that. Garrett Nussmeier, who I touted this year, ultimately not to have that come true. He's at 20 to 1 for next year. Jackson Dart, who's coming back, is also at 20 to 1 here right now as well. So a lot of SEC quarterbacks in the mix for next year, which gives you an idea of the sort of the theme of today's show. 2024 is going to be a wild and I think very fun year around the SEC because there are so many big teams, big names, big games to be played. Nico did have the pretty good bowl games. That makes Tennessee feel a little better about their upcoming season. Jackson Dart's coming back for Ole Miss. That was one of the big pieces of the Rebels, whether, Quinshon Judkins is following suit or not. Teams like LSU and Texas A&M who want to get back in the conversation. They feel like they've got returning quarterbacks that give them a chance to do that. In the case of Nussmeier, at least a guy that's played some. So pretty fun year coming up as it relates to the quarterback position in the SEC. Those odds from FanDuel give you an idea of just how true that is. Speaking of Ole Miss and Quinshon Judkins, last week it was a surprising piece of news when Judkins put his name into the transfer portal. We don't know for sure where he's going yet. But we do have some ideas of where he's visiting. From Judkin's own social media and some of the reporting coming in of Columbus, it sounds like Quinshon Judkins visited Ohio State here this weekend. So that gives you an idea of the kind of, market that's out there for Judkins. He's one of the most productive players in the SEC for this past season. And upon leaving Ole Miss, he's got the biggest names in the sport, probably in Michigan, probably in Alabama, now in Ohio State. They're all kind of out there looking for him. I guess the question I would have is, and we talked about this a little bit briefly at the end of last week. So obviously, if you're Ohio State, you'd love to have a Quinshon Judkins. All things being equal, no team would turn down a chance to have a running back of this explosive nature. But look at the way that Ohio State has sort of handled the quarterback position. This is a team in desperate need of quarterback. And by the way, when you see how well C.J. Stroud is doing in the NFL with the Houston Texans, boy, that shines a very interesting light on kind of what's not happening at the quarterback position right now at Ohio State. And maybe, from the standpoint that maybe Ryan Day should have gotten even more out of C.J. Stroud last season than he perhaps did. Interesting conversation going on there, but different discussion for a different day. The point here is that we have seen Ohio State be somewhat frugal. Is that the right word? Somewhat frugal with quarterbacks, NIL, at least potentially speaking. They did not get involved for Cam Ward. Finally took the guy to Kansas State, who's, maybe better than what they had last year with Devin McCourt, but not obviously so. And so this is a program like at Ohio State that has been somewhat frugal, somewhat budget conscious when it comes to a portal quarterback. Are they going to really break the bank for a running back? And if they're not, then if I'm Judkins, then I'm left to wonder, well, am I really better off going to a new team that's perhaps going to want me to carry the ball more because they're now paying some additional money for me, as opposed to staying in a place like Ole Miss I was perhaps comfortable with? I don't fault Judkins for going to the transfer portal if that's what he wants to do, but the sort of free market door swings both ways. And, winners got to be rewarded, but sometimes, some of the transfer portal losers who put themselves out there only to not quite get financially what they think they're going to get, that's going to probably be held up as a cautionary tale. I think it'll be very interesting to see which of these two kind of directions the Quinshon Judkins story sort of goes from here. But right now, he's drawing big interest from big programs. You can't deny that. John Stinchcomb made his feelings about Jim Harbaugh very clear there a moment ago. He's rooting against the Wolverines tonight because of his view that is a cheating program. I don't disagree with that. The other part about this that's interesting is the very strong belief among many that this could be Jim Harbaugh's last game as Michigan coach. In fact, Paul Feinbaum, who's been very critical of Harbaugh during his tenure there as Michigan coach, Feinbaum has said on ESPN over the course of the last couple of days that he's 100% certain that Jim Harbaugh leaves after this year, drawing NFL interest. I guess that's probably true. I mean, I should say more likely than not that Harbaugh, I believe, goes to the NFL. But keep in mind, nobody seems to like Jim Harbaugh. And I'm not being funny when I say that. People at Michigan don't seem to like him. The fellow coaches in the Big Ten definitely don't seem to like him. His previous employee, the San Francisco 49ers, a lot of folks there don't seem to like him either. So it's not an easy hire to necessarily make of, you bring a guy like this in, you got to wonder, it's not fantasy football. It's not just bringing a good coach to make a team better. It's how does this guy fit with the other people in the organization? Jim Harbaugh has a history of not getting along with people very well, including in the NFL. His previous general manager, Trent Baalke, there at the 49ers. So I would say for a lot of NFL teams, it is not a no-brainer hire. You have to be comfortable with what you're getting into, and you have to be comfortable, I believe, with what Harbaugh's demands have sort of been, which are he doesn't really want much in the way of a boss. At least that's, I think, his preferred situation here. I look at a scenario like Atlanta where there is a GM in place, Terry Fontenot. There is obviously a team president in place, Rich McKay, who seems to survive every single change that takes place with that roster overall. Could Jim Harbaugh be a fit in a place like Atlanta? Given the power structure that's in place here, I'd say probably not. Now, most Falcons fans might be happy to hear about that too. But I'd say, he's clearly a better coach than what Atlanta has had. He's more interesting probably because of just the backstory that comes along with this. I wouldn't hate Harbaugh to Atlanta, even though I don't particularly like Jim Harbaugh. I think the Falcons need to try anything they can, but it is an example of the fact that Harbaugh is not an easy hire for every NFL team to make that might, be considering a big-name proven winner like Harbaugh necessarily is. So interesting to see where all of this goes from here. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. We'll watch in some form or fashion this championship game here tonight. Let me also mention the All-American Bowl takes place this past weekend. I'll invite you to check out Jeff's Intel story, DawgNation.com. Jeff kind of goes in more detail about the Georgia guys who were there and kind of how they performed in all of this. Sounds like Nate Frazier had a touchdown. I'm excited about Frazier. I know the West team won the game. I'm excited about Frazier at Georgia. I think that he could be very interesting. He's not going to be an early enrollee, though. He's not getting here until after his high school year out in California is done. But I do believe that Frazier could be a lot of fun for UGA. And highlights probably worth going to check out. Sounds like he probably performed the best in the game of any of the Georgia signees. KJ Bolden was also there as well, and I guess now KJ is going to be at Georgia here this week. I guess he's probably already there, kind of getting to work now on his status as early enrollee. He wants to add some good, strong weight to be in line for some playing time here early this year and kind of the last official moment of his high school career coming in San Antonio this past weekend. Check out Jeff's Intel story on that at DawgNation.com for more details. Also, while we're kind of doing a little bit of a news roundup at the end of the show here, let's also shout out Georgia basketball. And, this team right now sort of seems like they might be worth your attention here a little bit. Got a nice winning streak going. They began SEC play on Saturday, beat Missouri. Really, for the most part, kind of controlled the game on the road there in Como. Now, this is not a great Missouri team necessarily, but this is a much better Georgia team led by Mike White at coach. This is a much better Georgia team overall than it probably has been. It's a home game against Arkansas Wednesday night. Is that right? This could be about to be getting interesting for Georgia basketball, playing a little bit better than they have as of late. And so that is a tremendous thing to see. So shout out to Mike White and congratulations to Georgia basketball on all of that. Now, one final note as we transition to our golden shoe here for today. Shouts out as well to a good showing from UGA guys, both Chris Kirk with the win and also Kevin Kisner making his debut in the NBC broadcast booth as the PGA Tour, at least what's left of the PGA Tour, began its 2024 season out in Hawaii, as it typically does there at the Century. And kind of a nice moment that some Georgia fans caught on the broadcast over the weekend of Kevin Kisner, instead of the PGA Tour, with all the Georgia players doing as well as they have, calling it the UGA Tour. You love seeing Kisner down in the broadcast booth. This is a little taste of what he brought to the broadcast there this weekend. We'll give him a golden shoe for a fun shout-out to UGA there on NBC. Take a look at this.
Your Bulldog, Chris Kirk, seems to be in a great position with a great rhythm going like he usually does.
They keep it up on the UGA Tour out here. 2 guys in the top 5, and Kirk's in the perfect spot. With his demeanor and the way he is, 2-shot lead with 7 to go here. And as good as he's driving, he's going to have 7 more birdie opportunities, I think, Kirk.
You love seeing Kisner down in the broadcast booth. Congratulations to Chris Kirk for winning out there, now Kapalua, and perhaps more UGA references to come from Kisner as he sits in there on that broadcast booth in the future. One can only hope. Fun way to see that begin. It's also kind of nice winter time of year to see golf being played out in Hawaii. Sort of makes you sort of feel warm on the inside to have this part of the golf season back, even if the PGA Tour's having its share of issues here right now. Nice to see Kisner in the booth, and congratulations for the former dog Chris Kirk going out there and earning himself the win. And also thanks to all of you for being a part of our program here today and your patience with us. We've sort of worked through a lot of the things that we've had going on here as of late. Fun show to be able to deliver this to you today in a way that sort of feels more like normal than anything we've done in quite some time. That is a terrific thing. So we certainly appreciate all of that. And by the way, stay close to Dog Nation coming up in the days to come there as well. We got a couple of more NFL draft announcements we expect to take place. Good news, we think, coming the way of Warren Brinson and Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas and maybe some, leaving anybody out there? Sort of seems like you're kind of heading towards all of that. And if you want a recap of the Georgia recruits at the All-American game in San Antonio, the Under Armour game in Orlando prior to that, Jeff Sintel's got some good stuff for you at DawgNation.com on all of that too. How about the lousy, stinking Gators? Long time since they've beaten Georgia, 1,157 days. That is our Gatorator Updater. We'll see all of you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. national championship tonight. We had some thoughts on that. Good stuff for Georgia. We got some thoughts on that there as well. So we will cover all of that ground here with you there as well. Frank Patterson says the Tate Ratledge came back to Georgia because NFL scouts were hoping for 2.5 more inches of mullet coming from him. That's pretty funny stuff. You love that. Good stuff there. Paul Moon having some fun in here. By the way, is it Lesko who changed his name from Lank to Stank? Is that our buddy Lesko that changed his name there on that? Nature Gator laughing at Mike White. Listen, you can laugh all you want, Nature, but it could be that. By the way, Florida, who lost a first half lead against Kentucky this week. Actually, let me say this, because I watched a little bit of basketball this week, and all of a sudden I'm feeling like Joe Lunardi. If you're a Florida fan, you got no room to be laughing at anybody from a basketball standpoint. You can't hold on to a lead at home against Kentucky. That's disappointing. Disappointing. Don't be coming here trying to do that. Nature Gator also says that Harbaugh's in between a rock and a hard place right now. I believe he's probably going to the NFL. I really do. But that is not an automatic yes for a lot of NFL teams. It's probably an automatic yes for some NFL team, but not all of them. Not an easy situation necessarily speaking. Let's see what else. A lot of talking here about Ellis Robinson. Yeah, I mean, Ellis is one of those guys that I'm very excited about, and I think has a very good chance of I think has a chance of being, that very, very, very good player. Let's see what else. Spencer Clark, unhappy with Michigan because of too much hype on J.J. McCarthy. Probably some of that. Let's see what else is going on. Frank Patterson says he thinks the Georgia secondary could be a weakness. I don't know that I necessarily feel that way. I mean, obviously, a transition away from a guy like Javon Bullard, not an easy thing to do. But and clearly not easy to lose a Kamari Laster, but I'm not willing to concede anything on the Georgia secondary. I understand where you're coming from with concern, but I'm not willing to concede anything there on that. Lance D says that Connor Wegman can be at the top of the list of SEC quarterbacks if he's healthy and given a game plan that fits his strengths. I don't know that I know enough about Connor Wegman to be able to say that, but I think your opinion on that's obviously very strong and pretty interesting. So I'll follow that more closely. Who is Mike Elko's offensive coordinator? I don't know that I know that. Who is he bringing in to be offensive coordinator? Matt Presley says thoughts on the tight end room and how it may change offensive formation. Do you expect 2 tight end sets like we have seen over the past several years? Yeah, so I believe that Georgia likes the 2 tight end sets because it just gives Georgia more versatility with its offense. So I believe they're still going to want to do that. Now, Georgia's going to have good slot receivers, so they may, do that a little bit less on the basis of that, but they're going to still like the 2 tight end sets. And obviously, when you lose Brock Bowers, what ends up happening is, and we saw a little bit of this last year with Darnell Washington, what Georgia is now is just sort of a normal team with really good tight end depth. What Georgia's used to be at the tight end position was something akin to the Avengers. Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington and what you thought Eric Gilbert could be, something that was like this sort of collection of superheroes. I don't know that quite that's what the Georgia tight end room is right now, but it is also still the envy of pretty much every team in America, even if it's not quite as, sort of like superhero style as we've seen in the past. You don't have the incredible speed of Bowers, the incredible size of Washington. But Oscar Delp is a very good player. He proved that to you. Guys like Jaden Riddell are terrific prospects. I believe that Lawson Lucky, with a full year of health, can kind of show that too. This is a tight end position that's probably still the deepest in America, and you have a number of guys that you could find some real meaningful playing time for. But it's not going to be what it was in 2022 when you had, these sort of superhumans in that position. And there's just simply no replacing Brock Bowers. That the overall production loss by Bowers' departure is probably a little bit more likely to come from the wide receiver spot than it is from the tight end, because that's just a big ask from anybody to be able to do that. G. Gray says that Auburn basketball is solid. They destroyed Arkansas. Yeah, Arkansas coming in on Wednesday. I believe it's here on Wednesday. A little bit reeling, like you said, they got beaten up by Auburn. And say what you want about Bruce Pearl, he's a good coach. And I like to make fun of Auburn fans for being a basketball school, but that fan base really does support that team. It's a very tough place to play. Very tough place to play. Cassie Turner. By the way, good to see Cassie in here. I feel like I haven't seen Cassie in a couple of days. She says, anything is better than our last season with Tom Crean. I've seen the lows. Yeah, no doubt that Georgia, everything about Georgia basketball just seems so much more polished and professional and sort of buttoned up with Mike White at the helm. No question about that. Paul Moon also says our secondary is going to be young, but we have insane amount of talent. 3 5-star safeties, 2 5-star corners, and a high 4-star dudes. Just need to grow up real quick, and I think that's probably true. Jonathan Aaron. See, no, normally Jonathan's comments I can read. This particular one I don't believe I can read. Johnny Bolton also asking about Jaden Maeva, I should say, who we talked about a little earlier. So there's reporting out there that Maeva visited Georgia here this week, this past weekend. Georgia, obviously, Kirby Smart has said they want 4 scholarship quarterbacks. What we said was, if you go out and get that 4th out of the transfer portal, it's not going to be like the star level player. It's likely to be, someone who, is comfortable coming in to contribute to Georgia's depth. I'm sure if it's Maeva who were to come to UGA, it's not obvious that he will, but if he were to come to Georgia, he would sort of see this as a chance to compete to be the backup, which is a valuable place to potentially be. Now, would I favor Gunnar Stockton against Jaden Maeva in a battle to be Georgia's number 2 quarterback? I believe I still might. But if you're Maeva betting on yourself in a situation like that, that's not necessarily a bad idea either. This is a guy who was pretty good for a team that was pretty good for most of the year. UNLV, for a good portion of this year, was like the best group of 5 team in America. They didn't quite finish that way. They sort of fell apart before the year was done. Maeva's numbers were okay. His passing numbers, he was in excess of 3,000 yards. His touchdown to interception ratio wasn't that great. Some of y'all probably know it off the top of your head. It was like 17-12 or something like that. I forget what the exact numbers were. Not an awesome touchdown to interception ratio. A little bit of stuff on the ground from him. I think he's probably a pretty good prospect. This is about what you would, if your job is to kind of round out your full quota of scholarship quarterbacks, this is about what you would go out and get. And I think that's, I think he's a good player, but we're not going to, make too much more of that than that. It's also one of those things of, maybe you see a greater opportunity somewhere else too eventually. But that's about that. Frothy Tavern asking about Tramel Walthour. So I believe that Walthour was the only Georgia player. I think I have this right. He was the only Georgia player who absolutely 100% had no eligibility left. He was the only guy. Now, you say, is he going to the Combine? The Combine is an invitation event. I would certainly hope that he would, perhaps think that he will. But the issue with Walthour is he was the one dude who could not come back. Everybody else had the option to. Walthour does not. Frank Patterson says, do you think that Bam will go 4 years in a row with 2 losses? Also, what's the word on the Southern Cal wide receiver we got? So I think that Jackson is one of those guys that comes in, and I don't know that, like, I don't know right now how obvious Jackson's fit is at UGA. I mean, I'm not saying he doesn't have one, but I think this, to me, sort of feels like an example of you bring in a guy and you just see how it all works out. Like, am I wrong for saying this? Like, some of y'all follow this stuff very closely, and some of you probably have a better eye for talent than I do. Like, to me, the arrival of Colby Young from Miami is probably a bigger deal than the arrival of Mike Jackson. Am I wrong for saying that? Do y'all agree with that or not? That's sort of the way that I feel. And I believe that London Humphreys is probably the biggest of them all because Humphreys has actually done it in the SEC. So I would probably rank the Georgia transfer receivers. And listen, I could be wrong. I could be way wrong. And if I am, y'all can tell me. But I'd probably go Humphreys, Colby Young, Michael Jackson. Now, Jackson may end up being, I'm not saying he can't be, a thriller of a player. I told you I wasn't going to do bad puns, so that's my one, and I'm not going to do any more of it. But in all seriousness, doesn't mean that Jackson can't be great, but in terms of expectation that I have right away, I'd probably be leaning more towards a Humphreys, then a Colby Young, then a Michael Jackson, I believe. Y'all tell me if you agree with that or not. Pizza Man says that Gunner needs to develop as a passer. He's an athlete for sure. And, I think that's probably true, that he's got to take that next step as a passer. He obviously put up big numbers, as a high school player, but that's not the same thing as what you do now, at the college level. But I'm really high on Gunner Stockton. I really am. I mean, I'm going to try not to make anybody out to be the next, all-time great. But do I think that Gunner Stockton could be a very effective quarterback for Georgia? I do. And, I'm fairly consistent on this there as well, that I was a little bit more pro-Stockton even when we thought that Dylan Raiola was coming here. Let's see what else. Alan Verbachi on the subject of being 10-2, being left out of the SEC championship game. Maybe that's the case, but 10-2 is not getting you left out of the playoff, I don't believe. And that's probably what matters more than anything else. Matt Rukavina said, before the show began today, there's a, way of looking at this where you want to be left out of the SEC championship. And the competitive part of me doesn't want to fully concede that, but there is perhaps some truth to that. Doug Rayburn says that none of MJ stats are eye-popping. That's true, but also, Caleb Williams had a really weird year this year. If you watch a lot of USC football, I'm not saying the guy they played in the bowl game is better than Caleb Williams, but how much better was USC just in the game? And how much more fun was that offense to watch? Something about Caleb Williams is not quite clicking for me. And I don't know if that's my thing or whatever else, but there's a lot wrong with USC. And the one thing that was sort of supposed to be right, the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, I'm not really quite so sure how good of a year Caleb Williams actually even had this year. So do with that what you will, I guess. Let's see what else is happening on Facebook over here. Joseph Kennedy making his feelings on Alabama very clear. Tennille Calvino says that she is reluctantly making some wings again tonight. Can't believe this is our national championship. Yeah. So here's what it sort of feels like. It sort of feels like, how for those of you who are fathers, you go on a business trip, the kids are acting all wild while you're gone, and everybody's sort of undisciplined and kind of, just whatever. Well, that's sort of what this year's playoff sort of reminds me of. Is, this is what it sort of looks like when Daddy's not home. Well, next year's playoff, Daddy's home again. So y'all better be on your best behavior next year. You got a chance to act crazy and act a fool here right now because Daddy's not home, but Daddy's going to be home for next year's playoff. Just keep that in mind. Ulysses Dunning says that three-peat would have been nice. It would have been, y'all. It would have been the greatest accomplishment in college football history. It really would have been, and it could have happened. And some people may say maybe it should have happened. But, that's for different people to say, I guess. But it certainly could have happened. Certainly could have happened. James Davis checking in to say Happy New Year. James, we're glad to have you here. Good stuff. Matt Rukavina says, it's bad for Florida when Kentucky's making fun of the Gators for not beating them in football or basketball in years. Yeah, that's tough. Tough scene. Craig Jones, is wondering if Saban will have his usual view from the press box tonight. Be careful what you say. You could. Oh, yeah. So basically, what Craig is calling back on is the belief that Nick Saban got David Pollock fired a year ago. I don't quite think that's true, but that is the conversation that's never going to quite come to an end there. Obviously, a year ago at this time, pretty funny stuff. Tennille Calvino says that she has a better feeling when she imagines the asterisk that she believes is going to come next to Michigan's name for this year's national title. Yeah, I've said before, I believe that Georgia has every right to claim a national title in the event that Michigan's title gets vacated. Every right to. And I'm here to tell you right now, I'm not respecting anybody who didn't beat Georgia head-to-head. I'm not doing it. Now, in Alabama's case, look, it is just a painful reality when a team like that beats you to a certain extent for a year. you got to sort of listen to their crowing a little bit. Some Bama fans, kind of give me grief from time to time. For right now, they do have a little bit of bragging rights, a little bit of scoreboard. Not as much as they might think, because this is another year of them having a worse record overall than Georgia, and another year of them having no national championship, save the pandemic year. They don't have quite as much bragging rights as they think, but they have at least some bragging rights because they beat Georgia head-to-head. But in terms of these other teams that didn't play Georgia, the Washingtons and the Texas, even Michigan himself, there will be no deference from me towards them because we don't frankly know what would have happened if those teams would have played. So yeah, that is that. Let's see what else. William Camacho says, in my heart, Georgia should be playing for a national title and a three-peat. I agree with you, William. In my heart, that's exactly what's true. Now, on the field in Houston, something different. In my heart, Georgia's holding up that trophy. I'm right there with you, William. I'm right there with you on that. Hugh Bond says, brutal schedule, 8 really tough games. Yeah, I'm telling you right now, I'd take 11-1 next year and run with it, and I might even take 10-2. I really might. I might take 10-2. I think that Georgia can go 10-2 in the regular season and easily win the national championship. I absolutely believe that's the case. Absolutely. Chris James wants 5 running backs and play a little wild dog in 2024. Let's see what else. Joseph Kennedy also a little bit concerned about the Kentucky game this upcoming year. Kentucky's had a very interesting offseason. Obviously, Brock Vandagriff has a chance to be successful there. I do believe that Brock Vandagriff is a good quarterback, and I believe he'll play well at Kentucky. I believe that's the case. I absolutely do. All right, we're going to do a little bit of DawgNation.com comments, and then I'm going to get ready to bounce out of here after that. By the way, if you want more on Jaden Maeva, Connor's got a story up at DawgNation.com about that. Just posted, I believe. And I will take your comments here for a moment. On DawgNation.com. Of course, glad to have you all for our RS Andrews cool down here right now. Rome Dog says, I'm glad to see that Tua lost yesterday. Call me petty. I guess I probably felt the same way on that. Our boss here at DawgNation is a big Bills fan. So I've always kind of liked the Bills anyway. I sort of like blue-collar teams, Western New York, not a fancy metropolis, kind of salt of the earth, hardworking people. Plus, as a wrestling fan, I sort of like the Bills Mafia a little bit. They're always doing those like wrestling-style stunts during the tailgates. I'm a little bit of a closet Bills fan in some respects. Randy Hall says the Panthers and Commanders have joined the Falcons in firing coaches. So Ron Rivera out. I wonder what that means for our buddy Jake Fromm. We'll talk to Jake here a little bit. I'm not even sure the Panthers coach was. How many times in a year have they fired coaches? They fired Matt Rule. If you gave me 5 guesses as to who the Panthers coach is, I don't believe I could tell you who it is. But, it seems like the Panthers had a new coach every year. Do they have a new coach every year? Rome Dog also gives you, here are the blue-collar teams. This is so true. Bills, Jets, Browns, Steelers. Those are the blue-collar teams. I agree. I might put Ravens in there as well. I know Baltimore's a little bit more of a, sort of a bigger city. I kind of put Baltimore. I think John Harbaugh is sort of a blue-collar style coach. I'd probably put Ravens in that there too. Bills, Jets, Browns, Steelers for sure blue-collar teams. And I believe I might put the Ravens there as well. DT says the Bills Mafia did a takeover of a large bar in Miami Beach this past weekend. It's kind of funny. We were eating in a restaurant in Fort Lauderdale prior to the Orange Bowl, and they had a bunch of Bills stuff in there. Hey, everybody in South Florida is from somewhere else, but we actually ate at a restaurant that had a bunch of like Bills stuff all over. I did kind of notice that. Thor Rule says Bama right now has 0 right to crow. They paid off the refs, and Georgia's going to be higher ranked in 2023, the final rankings. Well, there you go. Will that happen? Will Georgia be ranked higher than Alabama in the final rankings? I don't know. I'd be suspicious of that. Maybe they will. Let's see what else. DT says that Michael Jackson will be a good receiver for UGA. He'll make explosive plays, even thrillers. So there you go. There on that. Another fun play on words. Rome Dog also wondering about Ra Thomas and Dominic Lovett. Yeah, the expectation right now, not official, but the expectation right now is that both Ra and Lovett will return for this upcoming year. Good to see Dave Snow checking in from Nairobi, Kenya. You appreciate that. DT says if the Falcons hire Harbaugh or Belichick, I'm going to have to jump off a cliff. Yeah, I don't want like lame duck Bill Belichick. You know, Belichick is literally only still coaching so that he can become the winningest coach of all time. Probably take him about 2 years to do that, assuming that they, have any success whatsoever. But, I do believe that Arthur Blank has always been somewhat enamored by the Patriots. I believe that's true. And so I could see Blank offering Belichick that landing spot for what's, in all likelihood, probably his final job. The Harbaugh thing I wouldn't hate. I have a weird thing about the Falcons. Like, when they drafted Kyle Pitts, now they probably drafted a tight end way too high, but it's not like I was furious they drafted a Gator, I don't think. A guy like Harbaugh, who I genuinely don't like, if he won, to me, the Falcons are in a situation now, they just got to try to win. Hire the worst dude as coach, go out and get a bunch of, Georgia rivals as player. I don't care. Just be more interesting than you currently are. So, I don't like Jim Harbaugh. But if he made the Falcons better at this point in time, beggars can't be choosers. That's sort of where I am with that now. LA Dog says Green Bay is definitely a blue-collar team. That's right. Green Bay is a blue-collar team. Now, what's funny is that like the last 20 or so years, Green Bay, while a blue-collar fan base, blue-collar team, by far and away the smallest town of any NFL stadium, they've actually sort of played a little bit more of a glitzy style, right? Good quarterbacks, exciting wide receivers. It's kind of funny style of play-wise. And Buffalo, I guess, over the years has kind of been this way too. But so Green Bay is definitely a blue-collar team. It's named after meat packers, for goodness sakes. But their style of play has not always been sort of blue-collarish. I think that's kind of interesting. But they are one of the blue-collar teams for sure. Randy Hall wondering about where Green Soldier has been. So Green Soldier was taking a new job that was going to cause him to work during the day, he said. And this is going back a few months ago. And so that's why we don't see as much of him anymore. We still see him in the post-game show a lot, that's Saturday evenings. But he doesn't have time. He's working during the day now. Indoor Cycling Association said the Browns are also a blue-collar team. Definitely so. I'll probably be rooting for the Browns a little bit in the playoffs. Probably be doing that. All right, final comments, and then we're out of here. On YouTube, G. Gray says that Jalen Milroe won me 112 games. That Bama team was not elite. You say that though, G, but I still really liked Bama's defense this year. Alabama, probably did not live up to the hype from an offensive line standpoint, and definitely did not have the receivers that we're used to seeing Alabama have, but that was still a really good Bama defense. And by the way, one of these days you may have to tell us, like Malik Benson was a guy that I expected big things from, and now he's leaving. Kind of maybe what went down there, what went on, but I still really liked that Bama defense. And ultimately it was the Bama offense, I should say the Bama defensive line that gave Georgia more trouble than I believe that Jalen Milroe did. Jonathan Aaron says, how many more NFL coaches are going to be fired today? I don't know. I don't follow that league, obviously, nearly as close as I follow college football. But somebody told us, you got Panthers and Commanders added to Falcons. Chargers was already open. I don't follow the league close enough to really know who all. Are the Saints going to fire Dennis Allen? I don't know about that. Taylor Russell says the Quinshon Judkins story is riddled with juicy locker room drama. Could be the case. There's always going to be some ego associated with stuff like this. To your point, Taylor, I don't know if this is what you're referencing or not, but I did think it was interesting the other day that Jackson Dart took what I thought was a little bit of a jab against Judkins on Instagram, basically saying that he was selfish and not a team player. But now the flip side of that is Ole Miss is probably paying the quarterback Dart more in NIL than they were willing to pay Quinshon Judkins, which to me, if you're the quarterback, you got to be careful about stuff like that, to say, you're not a team player because you're going out there and chasing dollars, when as a quarterback, you're just going to have more access to money than the typical running back's going to have. So I thought the statement from Dart, or at least the allusion to an opinion from Dart the other day, was a little bit of a different type of thing. Let's see what else. Pizza Man on the subject of Jalen Milroe. Look, this sounds like sour grapes, and perhaps I'll be proven wrong. I don't think that Jalen Milroe is good. I don't think he's special. I think he's fine. It makes me so sick to my stomach that Georgia allowed him to have the success that day that he had. But Jalen Milroe is not a special quarterback. He's just not. He is just not. And maybe those will be proven to be famous last words again. But Jalen Milroe is not a special quarterback. Let's see what else. BA's Ty Stone Cold Style says that Todd Monken would 100% be an upgrade for Atlanta. Yeah, from a coaching standpoint, that's the kind of thing I wouldn't mind seeing Atlanta try. Be better on offense. You've got the pieces right now. You've had high draft picks being used on Kyle Pitts and Drake London and Bijan Robinson. Like, bring in somebody to find out, can you get something out of that, and then go out and do something from a quarterback standpoint. By the way, if you're worried about, draft class or like free agent class and quarterback, a coach like Todd Monken gets the most out of whatever quarterback you bring in. So if all you're going to be able to do is go out and get veteran guy in free agency and make him be your starter, I mean, that guy paired with Monken's offense, getting something more out of these very high draft picks Atlanta has had, that's at least more interesting. And if Atlanta could get Justin Fields, I'd want them to. But let me also say this, and I promise this is not an NFL show. I am pro Justin Fields. I like Fields. But some of the chatter that's out there right now, I believe this was started by Teddy Bruschi, but the idea that the NFL needs to crack down on teams hitting Fields late, essentially saying because he's a successful running quarterback that defenses are being given a little extra latitude and laying a lick on him. I believe that Bruschi is absolutely in the wrong about this. Y'all, I know Fields took the late hit yesterday, and I do get that. By the letter of the law, that's a penalty. But you have to make these running quarterbacks, these very successful running quarterbacks, you have to be able to make them think twice about that a little bit, or otherwise they're just going to fake slide and keep right on going. And someone like Fields is athletic enough to do that. You can't concede everything to them because they're just going to be getting free and easy yards. So, I mean, like, Fields took the late hit yesterday, but he didn't get murdered. He got hit, outside the boundaries of the rules, but, wasn't a felony, wasn't a debilitating injury. You got to have a little room for some of that sometimes. You got to be able to hit these running quarterbacks a little bit. Otherwise, you're making the game too easy. William Perry asks a good question. He says, is it more than fair to have tempered expectations for transfers, even Etienne? I think tempered expectations is probably a good way to say that. But, William, I think that the way I sort of think about it, and I think we're sort of saying the same thing in just slightly different ways, I think that numbers are difficult to project when you take a player and put him in a new offense. For instance, I think that Georgia was very happy with Dominic Lovett this past year, but Lovett had nowhere near the numbers that he had at Missouri because Missouri is a lot more willing to feature him a year ago. But, like, conversely, some guys come to Georgia and have even greater success. Like, look at Lawrence Cager a couple of years ago. Cager was a better player at Georgia than he had been at Miami. I think some of this, it's sort of difficult to know how a guy is going to perform in a new situation. Is he better? In some cases, he might be. Even on a better team, sometimes people play better on better teams. But in some cases, spreading the ball around more, the numbers going to be worse. So you say tempered expectations, probably a good way to look at this. I just say difficult to project all the way around. Like, I would say the door for Etienne could swing both ways. On the one hand, maybe he's not great coming in here. On the other hand, he's going to be playing behind a better offensive line than he's ever seen before. The other thing about Etienne is it's not like he was ninth in the SEC in rushing. He was, I think, second on Florida's team in rushing. So it's not like Etienne had like this amazing year this past year anyway. So I would say that there is some chance that he's even better at Georgia than he was at Florida, and in some chances maybe he's not, quite as good depending on what else Georgia has going on there. I don't know that, and I try to follow a lot of people online, their work and things like that. And there's some very smart people out there. I don't know that I've seen anybody yet who's particularly good at projecting how transfers will perform. Eventually, we're going to probably get to, and this is a very nerdy thing, but do y'all follow Major League Baseball? Do y'all know like the PECOTA rankings and things like that? It's like what Fangraphs does and things where you have some projected numbers for upcoming seasons. Eventually, I think we probably get a little bit better when it comes to some of that kind of stuff with football, the ability to project some numbers. I don't know that we're there right now. Jim K says Etienne will be better than anyone we've had this year. Could be true. Could be true. KC says that Gary Kubiak is just as capable as Monken. And in the case of Kubiak, he has been an NFL coach before, so that's interesting. Taylor Russell likes having some 220-pound backs dealt with pass protection. That's going to matter. That is going to matter for sure. All right, quick final thoughts, then we're going to go. Back on Facebook. Naturally, Facebook goes away. Got to pull this back out. On Facebook. One more time. All right, back in here real quick. Let's see what else. Y'all are in here clearly having a good time. I can't quite tell what you're talking about, though. But y'all are clearly having fun, which is nothing wrong with that. One more check at DawgNation.com, then we're out of here. Thor Rules does like Monken for the Falcons. I don't hate it. DT says Monken is an offensive coordinator, not a head coach. His chief skill is in the box as the play caller. Doesn't have the people skills to manage the entire roster. Here's the thing, though, is like the people skill part is not as important for an NFL coach. It's just not. In college, there's a certain sort of presidential projection you've got to be able to demonstrate. I don't know how important that is in the NFL. Like, I don't believe that Todd Monken could be a very effective college head coach because there is a sort of backslapping, kissing babies, posing for photos. There's just not as much of that in the NFL. So I think that Monken could be far more equipped to be an NFL coach than he could be a college coach. But to your larger point, Atlanta has had a salty, abrasive former offensive coordinator as head coach the last few years. It could be from a personality standpoint. For the introductory press conference alone, they want a slightly different kind of personality that Todd Monken sitting there and talking to the media for the first time would feel a little bit like Arthur Smith in some respects. So maybe the introductory press conference, Monken's too similar stylistically to what Smith would have been. But the personality issues that Monken has that I think would have always hurt him at the college level, I don't think that causes him nearly as much trouble at the NFL level because it really is mostly about are you winning games or not. So we'll follow that. Coaching searches are always fun, so I'm sure there'll be some interesting stuff coming out of the Falcons search there as well. We're going to wrap it up for now, though. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that, including getting your heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs, or if your water heater goes out, getting replaced in many cases the same day. So find them online, rsandrews.com, for a lot more on that. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.